Hello, I am C-3PO, and I believe the storyteller is ready. So, let us begin.
Oh, boy. Hey, look, everyone, it's Mando!
So the episode starts off where we see some Clatoonians cutting meat, and who arrives behind the curtain? That is the silhouette of Din Djarin, not Boba Fett, our Mandalorian gunslinger. He has his spear, and so we know what time it is. It is in the modern day. He banters with his bounty, and he pulls out his old cool lines, and he fights the guards, and he pulls out a new weapon. He has the Darksaber with him. He kind of wrecks the place a little bit, including himself, because he kind of sucks with it. It seems really heavy for him, and he cuts himself in a couple different places. And he cuts the head off of his bounty and wanders out kind of limpingly and makes his way throughout the city and delivers his bounty to his target and then limps his way to the underworld of this mysterious kind of ringish world to get aid from a couple of old allies.
So this kind of establishes that since we last saw Din, since he parted from Grogu, he's slipped back into his old ways of just being like a really ruthless bounty hunter who does the work and does it alone. And so he has a couple of meetings, discusses some other potential jobs. But while he's on this strange ring city, which I mean, like, I'm not going to be the first person who compares it to Halo. He has a little secret meeting with some more familiar Mandalorians, the Armorer, who we recognize from previous seasons, and also this Vizsla dude, who I'm not sure if we've seen him specifically before, but he's a total beefcake, and he's interesting. And he kind of has to catch them up on how he came to be in custody of the Darksaber, and there's a little back and forth about exactly what that means to him as a Mandalorian going forward.
Yes. So they kind of talk about the history of the Darksaber, and then the Armorer asks Din for his spear so that they can melt it down. Din asks for them to make armor for Grogu with it.
Yeah.
They make what appears to be kind of like chainmail armor, so that's going to be super cute to see him wear. And Din practices with Darksaber with the Armorer, and then Paz Vizsla calls him out for essentially being unworthy because he didn't kill Moff Gideon in the duel. And because the Vizslas are an arrogant family through and through. And so he wants the Darksaber. They fight. Din wins, and the Armorer calls it for Din, essentially saying, recite your creed. Did you ever take off the helmet? Paz is like, no, of course not. And Din pauses and then is essentially stripped of being a Mandalorian. He's told he needs to go to the living waters underneath the destroyed Mandalore to be able to redeem himself, and then walks away in shame, basically, and hops a flight to Tatooine. He basically takes a space bus to Tatooine to go to Pelimato's old shop because they've been in a little communication, and he thinks that she's got a Razor Crest for him there, but in fact, it's just a Razor Crest replacement, and we see that it is an N1 Starfighter.
Which was such a pleasure to see. And by the way, it's in shambles. It's basically been wrecked probably since that big war of Naboo. And she insists she's got all the pieces. Hey, we'll work on it together. And they have a cool Springsteen-like day in the garage where they restored this ship, and there's droids there. And it's kind of a rocky start once they get it going. It's a little creaky. He has a bit of a tricky time getting a feel for it, but he manages, and he gets up into the atmosphere, above the atmosphere, and oh boy, he runs into... This happens to Din so much. Anytime he's just like trying to mind his own business in a ship up in space, he gets pulled over by the cops. And it's, what's his name from Kim's Convenience, and another dude. They don't see him by face, but they recognize him by voice, and a little bit of questioning occurs, and they're trying to figure out if this is the familiar voice that used to fly a Razor Crest and has caused trouble before. And Mando, he doesn't really want to let on exactly who he is. He's kind of telling some lies about why his new ship isn't properly licensed or registered. Realizing he's not going to get out of this one, he just flees.
And so we meet back up on Tatooine. He lands, and Peli says, well, I've kind of scared away somebody who came looking for you. And then Fennec pops down, and they have a little conversation. Boba needs some extra muscle. Din agrees, oh, I'll do that job for free, but I have my little friend that I need to go see first.
It's really hard not to
continues on
recap
from there.
It's really hard not to recap this episode in like a lot of detail because it feels for the first time in weeks like everything matters so much. And obviously the main takeaway is that this is really not an episode of the Book of Boba Fett at all. It's a sneaky episode of Mando between season 2 and 3.
Yes, it's very much considered Mando season 2.5 in the rumor world, and we now know why. This was an episode of The Mandalorian, and that is pretty much my major and sole criticism of the episode, is that it doesn't feel like it belongs. But other than that, I enjoyed it so thoroughly that I don't care what show it is in. It's just a weird choice. It just feels like that. It just doesn't make a whole lot of sense, but it was still the best episode of the bloody show thus far, and I loved it.
I wouldn't say that it doesn't make sense. I just think that it's in a context unto itself. Like only Star Wars, and I guess like also Marvel, operates from this privileged position of, we know you've seen this other show. We know you're not going to feel alienated by us completely benching our main character to tell you this story for a while. And like most shows, when they try and do some really aformatic episode, it's upsetting. Like I think there's a few of them in Lost where like suddenly you don't really feel like you're watching the show that you always loved, and it feels like a wasted episode. And this, while unusual, certainly doesn't feel like a wasted episode. In fact, it feels like a highly critical episode for the story of Din. And so that's what's kind of interesting. If you're only watching Mando, say because you're a Grogu fan, and you figure I can probably skip Book of Boba Fett, especially since the first 2 episodes bored you to tears and you didn't watch the second 2, you might come back to Mando and be like, well, wait, what happened to his spear, and how did he get this ship, and where did the chainmail come from? It actually might be a little bit of a blind spot between season 2 and 3.
Yes, it is telling you that all of this matters and that you need to see it all.
Yeah.
That is good and bad. I think that it will potentially, because this doesn't have as good a rating as The Mandalorian.
Right.
And so it'll leave people with some questions, and they'll feel like, oh, that's a little cheap to make me need to watch this other thing to fully get an understanding of what's going on. But the fact that the Book of Boba Fett was introduced within The Mandalorian, and Mandalorian goes by chapters, and this is the Book of Boba Fett. It's almost like it's just the way you would have to view a larger text anyway, and that this is just a chapter of the Mandoverse that Favreau and Filoni have created here, and that this whole thing is more of an interlude than this episode is an interlude in Book of Boba Fett. Book of Boba Fett's more of an interlude in the Mandoverse, and this is more of a return to form, you could almost say.
Yeah, the other structural literary word I would use is epic. Like we always use the word saga to describe like a really long version of the Star Wars story, but typically a saga is like one character's story or like a singular linear story. But an epic has all of these side pockets. It can't just be one person's story. It has to be generational and cross geographic, and that's really a nice way that the chapter milieu kind of plays a bit of a role. Really well, like visual design. Did you love the Ring City? Do we have a name for this place yet?
No, I don't think we have a name for it, but yes, I thought it was a really fresh and cool take. I don't know if it exists in Legends. I'm sure it does, because it's so science fiction-y that there's no way that Star Wars hasn't tapped into that before with several planets that kind of have that similar style. But the Halo look was great.
Yes,
I thought it made a lot of sense, and it was kind of a cool underworldish looking place. But I think Din called it what did he call it? The Subterra, or the substrata, which was where the armor and Paz Vizsla were hanging out. That was like a really Star Warsy, straight out of A New Hope.
Oh yeah,
Star Destroyer style layout, and that was awesome. And it felt really good to be up in space on a show that has been so grounded.
Hell yeah. Yes, good point. Maybe that's another reason why this episode felt so fresh, because we felt so terrestrial in Tatooine, kind of imprisoned there for the last several weeks. So a lot of discussion of the way in this episode. And interestingly, Mando has had his heart broken. He opened his heart to something, and now he is alone once again. And here he is also in possession of the Darksaber, and where he has occasionally bent the rules of his creed in his own private journey, here he is alone again. And I think he's kind of hoping he can sort of like slip back into the way and just go on being the tried and true, at times unreasonable Mandalorian that he set out to be originally. And of course, when his truth is found out, he's not accepted among the Mandalorians anymore. And she says, go basically to the river Styx and be cleansed of your sins. And am I right to assume he's not going to do that at this point? He's going to be like, well, screw the Mandalorian creed then. Like, I'm on my own. Is that what you took from this?
I think he's probably going to want to go to that living water and cleanse himself. Okay. I think that he cares. He was begging for forgiveness right away.
Yeah.
And it's like, dude, did you not realize you're part of a cult?
I just think it's also a fallback. I think that he clearly doesn't want to be,
so right. He needs this other crutch.
She's so unreasonable. I mean, like, she's cool, and her like furry collar and her helmet is very cool, and so is Paz Vizsla, by the way. Like, he almost looks like Iron Man or something. But they're both...
I wonder why. You know who voices him, right?
Well, I know that. I think I thought that Favreau voiced Pre-Vizsla. Am I right about that as well?
You are right about that as well. He voices both of them. So Paz Vizsla was in season 1 of The Mandalorian, and he is a descendant. So my guess is Favreau is going to voice every Vizsla that he ever can. And when Tar Vizsla eventually has his animated, or maybe, well, not if it's a live action, but if he ever has an animated appearance in some show that is like maybe an Old Republic animated show, Favreau will 100% voice Tar Vizsla as well. It's the first family of Mandalore, basically, and so he's kind of claimed right to be the Vizslas.
Part of me even wondered if he was like the body stand-in for the character as well. And Favreau's like a pretty heavy-set dude. I don't think he's quite as like muscular as Paz Vizsla, but Paz is like, no, he's like a big beefy guy too. So I was like trying to rationalize whether or not it was like actually him doing the physicality. And then there's the combat sequence, which doesn't really like strain Paz Vizsla that much physically. Like, I figured, maybe it could be a little bit of John in there, but I actually don't think so.
No, I don't think so. And I don't think there's I would be pretty surprised if there is a single frame of Pedro Pascal's body in this episode.
Oh wow.
I would be pretty surprised. It is so little work. It is very, 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 very little physical acting. And the fight scenes are great, but the majority of the fight scenes are done by Lateef Crowder. And the classic walk, I've kind of been able to tell when it's Brendan Wayne's walk.
You think?
Depending on, because the majority of the street walking scenes from season 1, I know are Brendan Wayne. And so there's a little bit of a strut to it that you can kind of tell. And so I'm pretty sure there's very little Pedro here. I could be wrong, in which case they've mirrored each other so amazingly. But overall, I mean, it doesn't matter. Who cares? No. It was just so good to see our friend Din back. It felt like it really got me excited. As much as Boba has been a really great character, Din feels more like your friend that you're on the journey with. Because he is the real hero of this timeline.
Yes.
And being the one that we the audience connect with so much. Even though people Din doesn't know any of the deep lore, and so a lot of audience members know a lot more than Din does, but it still doesn't escape the fact that we're all still Din, and that we still don't really know what's going next, and we've got this plot armor on us, and it's great to be kind of brought home back with him. And are we going to see Grogu in the next episode? I kind of think we are.
Well, now I kind of do, which I never would have predicted that. But like that I think it's a little chainmail that we're going to get to see Grogu in his own little version of Mandalorian armor made out of the Beskar spear is adorable. And that it's like tied up into a little bow that resemble his ears is not a coincidence. Like it's just such a great little design. I can't wait. I think that we will, except the sad thing for the Book of Boba Fett, which is the marquee, is that another show is swooping in and stealing its thunder. And by the way, kind of proving also that we never really needed a solo story about Boba Fett, the real guy. Because the whole reason, we've talked about this before, the whole reason The Mandalorian exists is because they wanted to tell a Boba Fett story, but they didn't want to be beholden to all the canonical stuff they'd already established about Boba Fett. And so they did both. And I don't think they should have.
Yeah. Yeah, well, and that's the thing. Like, I think they should have kept Boba the way he was, and we'll see more about Boba. It is really going to be interesting to see. It's weird that we're not talking about Boba in the Book of Boba Fett, but he's not in this episode.
He's not in it. No.
I mean, like Fennec's in it, and there's no Boba. So we don't really know if there's any progression there. That story has stagnated. But not in a bad way, but what is Din going to bring to the table? Are we going to do another chapter of Mando season 2.5? Is Fennec going to come with him? Or is Boba going to come with him? Is Luke going to be in this next episode? Is Din going to be off world? And that's why he's only going to be in the episode 8. And then we'll see him coming back. We won't see Grogu. Like how there's a lot of ways in which they can go about it. Mm-hmm. And maybe we'll see that encounter as the start of season 3, whereas he goes to deliver the little armor to Grogu, and then that'll kind of connect the pieces for everybody else.
I think it's possible. I think there's a chance we're not going to see Din again until the very end of this season. If at all, although Boba's story has to climax in some kind of way. Obviously, the point is they need their muscle, and that's the reason they've woven it in. But I kind of think we're not going to see him next week. We might, and I would be fine if we did. But I don't think we're going to. I'm trying to get my thoughts together and figure out what I want to talk about next. Do we now go to Tatooine and the restoration of the Starfighter? Did that really excite you? I thought for a second it was going to be built out of an old pod racer, because it looked a little bit like Annie's pod racer.
I thought they were going. At first I thought they were going for an even deeper cut. I don't know why, but I thought it was going to be what Grievous's Starfighter was. I thought it was a Belba Lab.
Oh,
just based on the shape under the tarp, and then of course it was an N1, and it took me a second to realize what it was. It was I paused it, and it was like, oh my God, and then hit play right away because I wasn't sure how long they were going to show it for us. But that shop was just full of excitement, and that of course was the crown jewel.
I think when we did a podcast episode about our favorite ships, I think the N1 might have been on my short list. I just always thought it was such a sleek little. It almost looks like a butterfly in its own way, because it's very, very classy and Nabooian looking. But now it's quite beat up. I kind of hoped that it would get a new paint job. I kind of hoped that he would give it a green or something. But I don't know. I guess his color tends to be just the silver.
With the little yellow markings too, just like the Razor Crest.
And notably, they removed the brackets for an astromech droid. And instead, there's just a little bubble where clearly Grogu is meant to sit eventually.
Yes, and the best part about that little bubble is that, yes, Grogu's obviously going to be in there, but what does an astromech do? They can do little repairs. Well, if you don't have an astromech in there, they'll have to be able to use the Force. Or maybe some buzz droids will come up on board, and Grogu can just kind of concentrate and clear the buzz droids off. Or do what I've wanted to see in live action, which was when Vader was in his Starfighter and went face to face with another Starfighter and choked out the other pilot. I thought that was always a cool move. So it'd be cool to see Grogu mess with somebody's cockpit, like you see Din's in a dogfight, and then Grogu's there and he's he's messing with the controls, like he's like in their cockpit by pressing buttons with the Force or something. I don't know. It's just, I think it opens up a lot of possibilities for their little dynamic duo, that bubble. So I thought that was great and really smart.
Speaking of using the Force, I might be reaching a little bit, but it seemed to me in the second half of this episode, there was a lot of young Anakin imagery, from the piloting of the N1 to being on Tatooine in general. And then in particular, when he was like first learning to fly it, like out in the canyons, just in terms of cinema, felt so much like that Boonta Eve classic. And then even a little bit when he's talking to the cops, it almost feels like he's able to Force convince them a little bit of who he's not totally successfully. But what I'm trying to say is, like, do we think that there is a chosen one component to Din's story? Does he have the Force? If not literally, is he some kind of ultimate hero in a similar way as Anakin?
I think that, yeah, I mean, he's our protagonist, and he will have a similar hero's journey. And the number of comparison there are amazing. So he goes down Beggar's Canyon, and he flies over a Womp Rat, and he absolutely does the Boonta circuit. He is in an N1 above Tatooine and tries spinning because that's a cool trick. Yep. He is like, he's doing all of these amazing Anakin and Luke things. But he's also doing this very George Lucas thing by being in a hot rod, which is also very Anakin, which
Yep.
George Lucas tries to make these comparisons, and he speeds away, and he's got like the elevated engine with like the turbo boosters on top, like the way the like muscle cars have. And so it's got all of these things that are focusing on Luke and Anakin and that hero, like you say. And also in Legends, Boba is the one, and this has been brought up a little bit recently, and I think it's going to be right, that Boba ends up uniting Mandalore in Legends. And the way Din is taking his place in the current canon, it just makes sense that Din / Grogu, one of them will be the chosen one of Mandalore and become the Mandalore.
Yes.
The Mandalore is also a title too, weirdly enough. And so the Mandalorian will become the Mandalore, or Grogu will become the Mandalore in the end. But one of the two of them will, and it's their clan. And so I do think that everything you said in terms of a chosen nature is correct.
Well, I just thought of one more Anakin adjacent thing. He comes back after the joyride, and Amy Sedaris asks him how it was. And what does he say? What adjective does he use?
Wizard.
That
was actually my biggest fist bump moment of the episode. After like all these amazing things, they just added up, and then he gives us just a cool as hell wizard. And it's like, I don't need any more Dank Farrik. I do like Dank Farrik, but like, bring me some more wizard in Star Wars, said by badass Din Djarin, as opposed to like Kitster. Yeah, I want to see that. That was a lot of fun to see. There's also a lot of just great quotes in this episode versus the rest of the series thus far.
You want to rattle any off?
Sure, yeah. When Din is talking to the Klatooinian at the beginning, I'll let him know if I see him. I see him right now. I have no quarrel with you. I can bring you in warm. I can bring you in cold. It's classic lines, of course.
Yes, of course. That felt really good. In fact, I kind of thought that was like a good title for this episode until later when Amy Sedaris said, "Hey, look, everyone, it's Mando." And I was like, oh, we got to call the podcast that.
That one probably is a good one. Sadly, it only exists in Legends would have been another good title, I thought.
I thought that too. I kind of thought there was like a weird like meta winking at like longtime super fans with that, because we're talking about like, because Mandalorians and Boba, not Boba, have been so heavily chronicled in Legends, that felt like them winking at the EU.
That's absolutely what I thought, and so I thought that one really stood out to me as being kind of a fun little thing. And it also, like, songs of eons past foretold the mythosaur rising up to herald a new age of Mandalore, which is a great line. Mandalore will be laid waste and its people scattered to the four winds. I'd put that on ice if I were you. That's from Din. And Din, if you do me the honor of letting me pass, You can all help yourselves to whatever you think you deserve from your former employer.
I
That is a
also,
mob movie line.
you're right.
That
I
is-
also
that
really
fits right in Boba Fett.
fixated on the way he chose to phrase that, because he is like, you just know, like when he walked away back in that room, they're tearing each other apart for their share of the money, right? Like they're all getting greedy, and he knows that, and he's just like, well, that's not my problem. But like, it's his way of like judging them before they've done anything lascivious. And it was like, you're right. He's really in control of the moment.
Oh, absolutely. And he does, because he's exhausted at this point.
Yeah.
And he's stabbed himself a couple times. He's like, I already got my head in a bag. Let's just make this easy. They lost their way and we lost our world. That's a good line.
Yeah, that's really nice.
You're fighting against the blade. You should be fighting against your opponent.
So yeah, about that, does the Darksaber have, I mean, I know it's mystical, but does it kind of have like a One Ring quality where like it's not allowing him to fight with it to its full potential because he's not giving himself to its control?
A little bit, but lightsabers are a little bit like that anyway.
Okay.
In the sense that the kyber crystal bonds with the user. And so the only time really we've seen force sensitive people wield a lightsaber would be Han for like 2 seconds, cutting open a tauntaun. So he doesn't need accuracy to be able to do that. And Sabine gets a lesson from Kanan when she first discovers the Darksaber. And so when Bo-Katan is gifted the Darksaber, it's from Sabine.
Yeah.
And Sabine is a character from Rebels. And so she is trained to use the Darksaber by Kanan. And she talks about how heavy it is and how it's like difficult to control and wield. And Kanan says it's because you're not focused. And the whole point is that this episode of Rebels that talks about this is one of the episodes that really leads you to kind of believe that even the non-force sensitive could be force sensitive a little bit. In the sense that the Force kind of lives a little, well, we do know the Force lives in all of us in the Star Wars galaxy. And so in that way, anyone can tap into it to a certain extent if you're focused enough, but maybe not the ability to do anything, but maybe the ability to tap into kyber, which is something that is so imbued with the Force anyway. And so
Right.
Din not connecting with the saber is a spiritual thing that is also kind of connected with the Force, even if he's not Force sensitive. So it does make sense. It is consistent, and I think adds a fun new layer of him learning to battle and conquer and fight with it, not against it.
I'm also thinking about how Finn in The Force Awakens fits into that equation, because I don't know if we can canonically say with assurance that Finn for sure has the Force, although it's clearly like quasi written into the subtleties of Episode 9. And so like that's what you and I believe, and I think that that's what we're supposed to believe.
And it's in the holiday special as well.
Oh, that's a good point.
He has
Yeah.
the Force.
It's a shame
and
that
so
it's confirmed
it's
there
pretty
if
much-
anywhere. But yes, you're
Yeah.
right. It's pretty much something you can rely on. He uses a lightsaber that he hasn't had an opportunity to bond with, and he uses it with a certain amount of like gusto. I realize he gets beaten, but like he uses it pretty capably, even against Kylo Ren. And I wonder if that's a little bit more like a Sword of Godric Gryffindor situation where it like comes to the Gryffindor who needs it most, and like it's like the Graflex is cooperating with Finn because he is pure of heart.
I think that is absolutely the case when it flies to Rey's hand in the snow. But I think that Finn being able to use it is just, I think maybe in this case, a good example of it being something that requires you to be Force sensitive to wield with any capability.
Yeah.
Finn was Force sensitive and he didn't struggle to wield it. Whereas Din, I think this is good proof that he's just not Force sensitive. He needs to tap into the Force, even though he's not Force sensitive, or tap into the spirituality or the whatever that kind of the spirituality that allows him to connect into the Force of the blade to work with it, sort of. So that definitely is in aligned, and the way kyber is expanded in current canon gets me just really excited in general. I don't ever know if we ever talked about this on the show or ever talked about it ever, and it's totally has nothing to do with anything on here, but it was an amazing theory that I heard a few months back. And if we haven't mentioned it, the Cave of Mirrors on Octo.
Okay.
Maybe that's made of Kyber.
Mm.
And maybe that's where Rey gets her Kyber crystal that she makes her saber with at the end of The Rise of Skywalker. And so that would explain why it sings out to her and calls out to her, and why it can show things within the Force. It's kind of an interesting thought that I heard posited somewhere. So, but anyway, Kyber is something that I think there are so many mystical stories that are yet to be told in Star Wars about, so that it gets me excited.
Yeah, they seem to be, even post-acquisition, they seem to be more interested in talking about the specific lore of items as opposed to people. And the Darksaber is like a great example of that. Were you at all surprised that the other two Mandos let Din keep the Darksaber when they banished him? Like, I know they didn't like technically win it from him, but like they need that thing to get their race back together, and now they don't even consider him a Mandalorian anymore.
Yeah, so it's definitely weird. They would need to win it, but I'm surprised that she doesn't have any desire to take it.
Yeah.
She clearly, I think she followed Maul. She was part of Death Watch. They're confirming all that. She doesn't come, like, they're crazy cultists that come from a cult of like warrior murderers, that were Mandalorian extremists, and so she's an extremist offshoot of extremists, and so the fact that she has a code to not then fight Din for it, which she could clearly beat Din in a fight at this stage, just based on their training, they show it. She's able to use her wrench and hammer, or tweezers and hammer, and beat him basically. So that seems a little odd that Paz is the one who goes up where he's clearly not the superior fighter, but wants it for his motives. But she kind of is this really neutral, just stoic for almost the sake of being stoic. So there's some backstory there. We need to understand her motives a bit more.
Is she going to be an antagonist for him through the long haul, or is she eventually going to soften up and see that he is Mandalore after all, and that like maybe, like, I realize like some of the remaining Mandalorians are going to stick to their guns, so to speak, and they're probably going to become villains in doing so. Maybe Bo-Katan is one of those people. But although she's already on the outs with, like, say, the Armorer, I think there are other Mandalorians who will come around the way Din has started to.
I agree, and I think that a new way will be formed. I do foresee the Armorer being an antagonist at one point, whether it lasts, but there will be a big blow up, I believe, a lot more than this. I think that this is small potatoes to that character has got some layers that we're going to find some really interesting details about. I think that her working with Maul is a slam dunk, and I think that will be kind of the straw that breaks the camel's back for Din. So if he finds out, wait a minute, you supported the guy who took over Mandalore just because he was good in a lightsaber fight and cut the head off of the current guy who wielded the Darksaber, and as a result of that, just like let the entire planet burn and all of these horrible atrocities happen. And this is a guy who has a reputation for killing Jedi, kind of a race that I've come to, appreciate.
Yeah, you're not better than me.
You're not better than me. This isn't the way. You don't know what the way is. And even something like that could be enough to turn a guy like Paz Vizsla to realize, wait a minute, you kind of like supported Maul, and he killed my grandfather or whatever it was, or my uncle or something. So you suck. What the hell? Like something like that could even happen if you get Paz Vizsla to turn on the armor, and like I could absolutely see something like that being a rise against, whereas everybody kind of unites under a new way.
I could see that happening too. Okay, so then Din has to kind of like tuck his tail between his legs and get on the Airbus back to Tatooine. And by the way, is that a Corellian freighter that he takes to? Because it doesn't look like the Falcon, but it sure resembles the Falcon in certain stylistic ways, like with the.
Most likely,
yeah.
So many Corellian freighters, and they do have a significant style. I'm pretty sure, if I'm not mistaken, it's the one that we see in the trailer, which was analyzed heavily, and I know was confirmed to be a Corellian freighter, and they identified the model number. So I'm pretty sure you're spot on that it is indeed.
I was a little disappointed because there's this like funny comedy scene where they won't let him on the ship until he checks all his weapons, and so they have this funny shot of him taking everything off of his armor that could be used as a weapon, which, as it turns out, completely fills the case. Like, he has so many weapons, including the Darksaber, and then he closes the case and he hands it off the same way you'd have to like check your pocket knife at the airport. It's basically a joke about airport security, and that's fine. But I kind of thought that it was going to have implications. Like, he was going to have to fight somebody with his bare knuckles up in space, or like there was going to be some kind of consequence for him being disarmed, but it was just for comedy. I guess it was a metaphor for having been kind of neutered by this most recent experience.
Yes. Yes. I found actually the Razor Crest, losing the Razor Crest was a nice metaphor for baggage too, as well in this episode.
Yeah.
It was one of, I was like, Yeah, he's gone a little more streamlined here. We're getting a new and improved Din. This is not as much as we thought we were getting the same old Din at the start of the episode. We get a little bit of a Din's grown, and so this episode was so much more nuanced than the previous episodes. It's not even close.
Man.
Bryce Dallas Howard knocked it out of the park.
That's right.
It's easily the best written episode. The next line I have written down here is persistence without insight will lead to the same outcome. Like, the episode is so well written. It's
I know.
Just a bloody, it absolutely gets my top 10 episode of live action television that I've been looking for. And so it just gets me so giddy to talk about it.
I thought that too about Bryce Dallas Howard. Like, give this director a feature. She's only created fabulous Star Wars. And you're right. Like, not to rag on Book of Boba Fett, which I think could have a really strong couple episode finish, but like, it just doesn't feel like we're playing in the same league. And actually, it was such a great relief to come home from work today and throw on what I thought was going to be the next episode of Boba, but is actually like a sneaky episode of Mando. And to be reminded that Mando's like my favorite friggin' show. It's so good. And it's still good. And that like we only have to wait like a few more months before we get to see season 3. It's such a great like little appetizer for what's to come in Star Wars. Because what a lot of people are starting to say when we discuss Star Wars, I mean, me with them, is, gee, this doesn't look too good for Star Wars television. Like, I guess the Mando was a fluke and Star Wars TV shows aren't going to be as good. And like, I don't necessarily think that's the case. I'm not heartbroken by Book of Boba Fett not being my favorite show of all time, because I didn't need for it to be. I'll be really disappointed if Obi-Wan Kenobi's not really, really great. I have high hopes for that show. And so I'm more nervous for it. But like, if an episode of Book of Boba Fett kind of bores me a bit, I don't lose sleep over that. Whatever.
Yeah. When I think about like the way that, as much as you don't need to rank these properties, yes, Mandalorian is like right up there in original trilogy territory quality. I'm not expecting that from everything from Star Wars.
It's unreasonable.
And that's not fair to. Book of Boba Fett is more in like the Rogue One category. And I'd say probably I like Rogue One maybe a little bit more than I like Book of Boba Fett thus far. But that doesn't mean that it's like it's bad by any means.
No.
It's still been quite interesting, and it's an incomplete story, and it would be unfair to judge it until it's over. And also, this episode is still part of this TV show,
True.
Even if it felt like it was part of another one, and maybe should have been part of another one. But it was part of this show and was wonderful.
So,
and there's also,
I was just going to say, Din runs into the X-Wing pilots again, One who he's met a number of times. And then who is this other guy? The guy he was talking to at first. Like, we weren't supposed to recognize him, but does he have any kind of external significance as an actor?
Yes. So he actually is he probably was the most famous actor scene character in Star Wars in like the most recent like 10 years. He played Luke in season 2 of the Mando with Mark Hamill. So yeah, his Max Lloyd Jones. So he was the Luke Skywalker from season 2 of Mando, and so he got some face time in addition to his screen time.
That's a classy move on the showrunner's part. Like, let's give this guy a moment in the spotlight. He's important now to Star Wars, and like I'm sure he was thrilled to get to do that scene. What else? What else do you want to say about this episode? Any other big observations?
So there was also the BD series droid. Those are from Jedi Fallen Order, the little tiny 2-legged droid that looks a little like an AT-ST. And that's kind of like a backpack droid, but it's a buddy droid. And those are just some of the... He's one of the cutest characters, BD-1, in all of Star Wars, and is a phenomenal... one of the best droids, really, like top 3 droid in Star Wars, and that's saying a lot, the BD series design. And it was awesome to see that in live action. So much personality in that little design.
I loved everything about the garage sequence. Like I remember finding Amy Sedaris' character. I always forget her name. I like Amy Sedaris a lot, obviously, but Peli, is that her name? I didn't care for her when she first turned up in Mando, and now I kind of really like her. She's really grown on me a whole lot, and I like that she has this recurring friendship with Mando, and she's actually like pretty reliable, but she's unintimidated by him, which I think is likes but she's also kind of unimpressed by him. and she like likes Grogu, but she finds his whole deal to be kind of like goofy, and so she's a really, really good stationary ally for Din.
Yeah, it's nice that he's got somebody that he can go back to, the old mechanic shop where he can slap some paint on his vehicle, get it gassed up, and then go back out in the road. It was very grease lightning in space, like force lightning.
Right.
Oh, force lightning. So it was a fun scene. I thought the overall resulting product would make George Lucas very proud.
Me too.
And just couldn't have felt like a better blend of trilogies. And also, yes, as we talked before, so great to see Carson Teva. Anything else you want to say about this episode?
No, that's kind of it for me. Do we have anything in Star Wars news?
Not a ton in the news, but there are 3 new video games coming out, confirmed from EA, and so that does confirm a Jedi Fallen Order 2, which is awesome. I love the first one, so that is very encouraging, nice to see. Anthony Daniels as well is back to doing mocap performances, and so I believe it's for a droid story, which makes me intrigued to see, and that aligns with my hypotheses that this is going to be a cool experiment and that we're going to see a new type of animation. And the fact that he's doing mocap means I'm already right. So that's cool.
Yeah, that's very exciting. And that's it, eh?
That and one other great piece of casting news that it's staying within the family in the galaxy far, far away. And Obi-Wan's real-life love interest will be playing somebody in Ahsoka. And so we have Mary Elizabeth Winstead, who is cast in the Ahsoka series under a role that we do not yet know.
By the way, she's perfect for Star Wars. I don't know why I didn't think of it before. I'm thrilled to see her cast. It's so funny that she's in her own project, like nothing to do with Ewan's project. There's really no chance there's going to be any crossover between their scenes. But she's like, well, hey, I want to be in Star Wars too. And so they found her probably a great role. So I think this is awesome. Yeah, no, this makes a lot of sense. And although we don't know if Hera is going to be in the show, but they're recasting a lot of characters from Rebels. And if Hera is one of the main characters from Rebels, and she's a Twi'lek, and I don't know, Mary Elizabeth Winstead's face feels like a very good live action representation of what Hera would look like. Yeah.
And I see no reason why that couldn't be a good fit in terms of having a solid actor, depending on the level of the role. If this is the case, then the fact that they've brought her on as early as they have means it needs to be a character of some significance. And so if it's a character we already know, I think the best chance is Tara. Otherwise, it's probably a new character.
So there are, yet again, no Star Wars birthdays. We're in a bit of a birthday desert, but we do have a little bit of mailbag action this week, which is kind of exciting. A fairly long write-up from Chris. Chris basically is not terribly thrilled with the Book of Boba Fett so far, not unlike how a lot of people feel, but he's taken the time to write out what he thinks would be a better way to at least incite a remount of the Book of Boba Fett. Some stuff he thinks really works and we could keep it. Other stuff he thinks it just needs to have a little bit more oomph behind it. So I'm going to read to you essentially verbatim what he sent to our email. So this is Chris talking now. Okay, so I'm watching the new Boba Fett series and I am enjoying it on the basis of the fact that it's new Star Wars content. I'm never going to complain about new Star Wars content. But there are obviously many problems with the show, not the least of which is the fact that they want Boba Fett to be a crime lord. But because he's a Disney hero, they don't seem to want their leading man to get into any criminal activity. So here's my rewrite of the show. The show opens with Boba Fett unconscious in the Sarlacc pit. Let's just say that the Sarlacc is dead now after all the commotion from Return of the Jedi. In the pit with him is not a stormtrooper, but a clone trooper. We've heard before that the Sarlacc digests you over 1,000 years. So maybe this clone trooper has been down there for like a decade or more, and we learn that the Sarlacc actually keeps its victims alive while it digests, Matrix style. We see the clawed hand of Boba Fett pull himself through the sand, but we soon learn that the clone that pulls himself free is not, in fact, Boba Fett. It is the clone trooper. He uses the flamethrower and other tools on Fett's armor to break free and then steals the armor. Nobody knows Fett is dead but him. And he takes the armor and assumes the role, the name, the reputation of Boba Fett on Tatooine. One timeline tells the story of Phoba Fett as he tries to build a crime empire and live up to Fett's reputation, though he's fumbling through it a little bit and he's constantly narrowly avoiding being exposed as a fraud. But then the true Boba Fett, who was left for dead, climbs out of the pit and collapses on the sand. True Boba Fett is rescued by the Tuscan Raiders, and his arc and development with them occurs similarly to what we've seen in the show. He's learning what it means to truly be Boba Fett without the armor for the first time, akin to Iron Man 3. Does the armor make the man, or does the man make the armor? And the climax of the story is the conflict between Boba Fett and Phoba Fett, where Boba needs to defeat a physically and physiologically identical version of himself, though without the use of any special armor or technology. All he has is wit, cleverness, and the tactics taught to him by the Sand People. The vibe is similar to Predator, where Arnold fights the technologically and physically stronger Predator using traps and mud. Fett eventually wins, earns the armor back, inherits the crime lord throne, and cue the end of the season. It takes some creativity to make this work without retconning Mando Season 2, but it could be done. This is a story arc of the legend of Boba Fett growing beyond ruthless bounty hunter and becoming a daimyo worthy of respect and tribute, which I thought was like a very, very thoughtful remount of the series, which gives it a kind of a hero's journey with a little bit more consequence.
Yeah, this was, I thought, was really fun. It's something that is honestly a merge of two stories. It's the Book of Boba Fett merged with the story of Cobb Vanth, whereas Cobb Vanth is a villain. Mm-hmm. And I've got no issue with that. It's a different interpretation. I mean, I like the character of Cobb Vanth, and I don't think it could ever work in the sense of I do think there are too many major retcons you would have to do to make it within Mando Season 2. But aside from that, if this is a world that exists pre-Mando 2, and the short story we have of Cobb Vanth, you could find a way to turn out that he's maybe not so much of a hero after all. And then you could have written the story that way, and it actually would have worked perfectly with the story that we had known of somebody kind of recovering Boba's gear. I think the fact that it's a clone trooper down there and digesting over a long period of time and staying alive, and the fact that a clone trooper climbing over the Sarlacc, but that's so smart. I think that would have been such a cool kind of way in which you could, have blow people's minds, because like that's a twist you can do midway through the season, and people aren't really realizing what's going on. But then you go back to the Sarlacc pit and you realize that, oh, wait a minute, oh my God, there's two of them. But then you're cluing in, that's the reason why this Boba looks so old this entire time, is because he's aged at a rapid and accelerated pace versus the normal Boba. And you just, it answers all these questions. It creates a different show, but it's one that if it had been given to me in like the right approach, I never would have had any issues with, and I think could have been a really, really cool way that this story was executed.
Yeah, and you don't actually have to retcon that much of that season 2 episode of Mando. It would just be new context that who we thought was Boba was in fact not Boba. Although you bring up such an interesting point about how Boba the clone ages at a different pace than your standard clone trooper. I definitely forgot about that facet, and that would be something they could play around with. But the other thing that it reminds me of, and he's used a couple of pop culture comparisons in this little write-up. The other thing it reminds me of is Mad Men, where like you discover some way through the first season that he's actually not Don Draper at all. There was this like explosion and he just took someone's identity and made it into something. And like that's like a pretty cool thing to do with Boba Fett, considering he didn't have that much of a backstory canonically to begin with. And so it's like, it really is somebody like stepping into the role in a literal sense.
I just got at the end there, in a literal sense.
Oh, yeah. Okay, we're having some Wi-Fi problems tonight, but I think we've arrived at the end of the episode, which is the most important thing. If you have any thoughts on Star Wars the way Chris has done, oh man, we would we get no mail. We would spend a lot of time discussing your mail. recorder66podcast@gmail.com, or you can tweet us at recorder66. As always, please make sure you rate and review on your preferred podcast app, or if you're joining us on YouTube, be sure to like and subscribe. Next week, we're probably going to be back with Boba Fett, so we'll be talking about him in the penultimate episode of season 1 of the Book of Boba Fett. So make sure you've seen that by the time you listen to next week's episode, and until we are together again,
may the Force be with you.